Welcome to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and today we are delighted to have with us virtually two debut authors, Katie Holt and Tara Ty, whose new books are soon going to be available for you in bookstores and libraries like the Poison Pen. We do have copies of both authors' books on order. If you'd like us to hold one or put one in the mail, just give us a call or go online to the Poison Pen Bookstore. Now I'd like to welcome Katie Holt and Tara Ty.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yeah, likewise. Very
Thank you
excited
for
for
being
today.
here. My first question for both of you, and we'll start with you, Katie, is before Not in My Book was published, you had a life. Who was Katie back then?
Oh, she was still all about books.
Okay.
I wrote not in my book when I was in college, and I was studying creative writing at the time, and I was also a bookseller at the Strand.
Wow.
I had just moved to New York City when I wrote my second draft, and so I filled in everything from there. But my life was still very much bookish before, and it will continue to be.
So you kind of planned on being an author early on in life. So
Oh yeah, it was always the plan, always the dream. Had to work with books and be a part of books somehow. That was always what I wanted.
what about you, Tara?
I I can't claim to have such bookish roots, unfortunately.
Hmm.
I've been writing for a while. I always knew that I loved telling stories and that I wanted to write novels. My day job is in product management for a tech company, which is sort of my surrounds right now. And I wrote single player in 2022 after playing far too many video games during the lockdown, during the pandemic, and wanting to bring some of my love of video games into novel form.
What was the initial path to publication like for your debut book? And we'll start with you, Tara.
So the path was long and winding, as it often is in publishing. For single player, I drafted it very quickly over the period of, I want to say 3 to 4 months, which is bonkers. I don't usually write that quickly. That was the first draft. Uh, my agent and I got a second draft out the door, like did a few passes on it basically, and then we went on sub maybe 6 to 7 months after I first started writing the book, which again is a very uncommon timeline. It was out on submission for about a year before it was picked up by Jess Verdi. It was awesome. Senior editor over at Alcove Press. And then from there, it took us about another year of edits, designing the cover, sort of sending it out for blurbs and for reviews. And here we are today. Single players was available as of Jan 7th, 2025. So all in all, I'd say it was about a 3-ish year journey from first word to publication.
That is relatively quick in the publishing world. What about you, Katie?
Mine was a little different. I spent a lot more time with mine before I ever showed anybody. I think my first draft I wrote in 2020 and I was living at home. I was a freshman in college. And sorry, my dogs are going crazy if you can
Okay.
hear them, sorry. But I was a freshman in college and I was like, this is my secret little passion project. No one will know about it. And then I moved to New York and I was like, oh my God, I actually really love New York and I want to write a love letter to it. So I finished up a revision in about another year, sent it to my agent, signed with her, and then we did a revision for a year. And then my senior year of college, which was this last year, we signed with Jess and we got our edits out fairly quickly. I would say in 6 months, and then yeah, and then publication. And it was super nice. It was super overwhelming, but definitely a long journey, as many people can attest to, like Tara said.
What would you like readers to know about your debut? And we'll start with you, Katie.
Ooh, I would love them to know that it is a love letter, like I said, to New York, but also to romance novels and to my Peruvian culture. I am so passionate about bringing that representation because I have never read a book with a Peruvian character and I haven't really seen it on TV or many actresses or actors or singers or anything like that. So I really want readers to know that it's all about love, it's all about New York, and it's got some dashes of Peru in there too.
What about you, Tara?
It's so funny, Katie, because I feel like we have very divergent paths to our debut
Hmm.
novels, but so much about our books are so similar. So single
Yeah, yeah.
players is also a love letter not to New York City, but to gaming. As I alluded to, I played so many games during the pandemic, and I actually see this parallel because gaming has sort of a poor reputation, or it used to. I think it's getting rehabilitated now, in the same way that romance and rom-coms as a genre has sort of a poor reputation amongst people who would deem themselves literary writers, which is kind of the plot, or at least a subplot of your book, Katie. So I wanted to rehabilitate the image of games. It's a love letter to games and how games can make us feel, and how gaming is a great medium for storytelling. And it's similar to Katie as well. I haven't seen a lot of Asian American sapphic representation in adult rom-coms. There's quite a lot going on in YA, but I'm challenged to find sapphic representation where both members of the couple are East Asian American. So I also just wanted to fill that niche, I guess, in the genre.
It is sometimes the case when a reader looks at a book that the author puts bits and pieces of themselves into their characters. I think in both of your cases, that's very true. Can you talk a little bit, and we'll start with you, Katie, about your protagonist and how you used your own experiences to shape her as a character?
Yeah, totally. And anyone who knows me, it's very, very obvious. But I think that the bones of Rosie are very similar to my bones. Both Peruvian American from Tennessee, moved to New York, love romance, but I'm just not as bold as Rosie is. She's everything I wish I could be. I was in creative writing classes where people, talked so terribly about romance novels and literary fiction was all the rage. And I just like, I would fight a little bit, but I would also kind of sit back and I was never so brave. But she's a lot bolder than I am. But I think we both have that same passion for the genre and, same roots and same love for New York and our culture and in those kind of ways. And obviously both writers.
What about you, Tara?
I feel like I'm echoing a lot of what Katie's saying. So two characters in my book, Kat and Andy. Kat loves romance and video games, loves playing video games for the express purpose of romancing fictional characters. And I similarly wish I could be as bold as Kat, because Kat started her career in accounting and gave it all up for a shot at writing narratives for video games. And so there's a lot of me and my passion for video games in Kat. I also inject a lot of my personality into Andy, who's the deuteragonist, because Andy, non-binary game dev, who is very anti-love and anti-romance, and just doesn't feel like a video game needs to have love and romantic storyline in order to be good. And a lot of my friends were actually surprised when they found out I was writing a rom-com, because I am not the most romantic individual IRL. So I think in terms of outward presentation and schmoopiness, for lack of a more eloquent word, I share a lot of personality traits with Andy as well.
Setting is also important in many books, and I was fascinated, Tara, by the fact that you put single player in Boulder. What prompted you to choose Boulder as your setting?
Yeah, there are a handful of cities in the United States where game dev is sort of a major industry. LA, Santa Monica region immediately comes to mind. Boston, where I spend most of my time living, is another city that comes to mind. But there are a lot of books set in LA, set in New York, set in San Francisco, and actually set in Cambridge, Boston area. There aren't a lot of books set in Boulder. And I wanted to highlight a city I love. I don't live in Boulder, but I really enjoy visiting Boulder. I wanted to pay homage to a game studio that I really respect, which is Deck Nine. They make the narrative-driven choices matter games like the known as Life is Strange. And I also wanted to just set it in a destination where there is an urban area, but my protagonists could easily escape the city and go to the mountains and go to sort of like a beautiful scenic backdrop, because that's a common theme in video games, especially in like post-apocalyptic video games. They're always trekking along in the mountains, and I just wanted to have that flexibility of setting.
Amy, you've already mentioned your book is a love letter to New York, but what did you want to highlight about the city when you wrote Not in My Book?
I think just how romantic it can be. So many of my favorite rom-coms, especially movies, especially the Nora Ephron ones, I feel like you fall in love with the city as well as the love story that you're witnessing. And there's just so much to it. There's something happening on every single corner, every single neighborhood. And I wanted to really capture that and make New York a character in and of itself. I wanted readers to be able to feel like they were there and experience, Christmas in New York or the holidays in New York. And I really just wanted to highlight, I guess, like the whimsy of New York. You can't predict what's going to happen when you step on the subway. You can't also predict what's going to happen like on your own corner and in your own classroom. And I just wanted to really capture that.
One of the things that I loved about single player, and I'll apologize in advance, is I know nothing about gaming. I mean, the last game I played was Atari Pong in the 70s, so that sets the reference for this. But you opened that world up to readers. It's fascinating. And what, um, I guess my question is, it seems like when you're developing a game, when you're writing a game, in some ways that's almost like writing a book. Is that true or not?
Yeah, I think it is, and it's easier because you hopefully have some amount of financial backing, and it's harder because you're working with other people. As we all know, hell is other people. But it is very like writing a book, except with the complications of your not only working with another writing team, which is much like movie making or TV making, but you're also working with engineers. And the awesome thing I love about video games is you have to think about the haptics, like the sensory experience that you are walking players through. So as they meet a mentor who teaches them a new paragliding technique or how to throw bombs or gives them a new gun or teaches them how to use their katana in a new way. You're teaching the player new mechanics that they have to master with their thumbs and with their eyes, at the same time as you're growing their character and developing their narrative and hopefully telling a satisfying story from beginning to end. And that's both the really complicated thing about video game design, but also I think probably what is really rewarding at the end of the day if you really nail it.
Is the video gaming industry becoming more open to incorporating romance, a love story?
Yeah.
Or is,
Romance has actually been a linchpin of video games from the
oh,
very beginning. I mean, if you think, I think I pay homage to this a little bit in the book. If you think about the Mario games are just sort of about romance. They're about a
yeah.
plumber trying to save a princess for true love. So romance has always been a core part of video games. I think video game culture really has been historically catered toward a certain demographic of player, however, and it's usually a male protagonist and also a heterosexual protagonist. So therefore, the romance interest is usually a female character. That is changing, and that has been slowly changing in the last decade. And I'm so grateful to be living in a world where now we have non-binary love interests and we have trans love interests and love interests of every shade and color and ability out there. So that's something I'm excited about.
Katie, I really enjoyed Not My Book because you're such an advocate for the romance genre. It seems like we've been fighting this battle ever since the 80s to get it respected, and I thought we had made progress, but it seems like there's still work to be done.
Yes, I think that there's definitely been progress. I mean, in my lifespan, which is not since the 80s, there has been progress. I was in high school, like, or even middle school, like reading books with like pink on it, people kissing on the covers, and like my teachers would be like, you have to read real books. Like, these are not real books. These don't count towards reading goals. And I'd be so frustrated because I'd read like 50 of them, and I'd be like, how come this doesn't count for real books while, Joe Schmo over there is reading one? Um, and I was just so frustrated. Even with my friends and family, they were like, they're not real books. Like, they're just guilty pleasure books for women. Um, and I do think that book talk really does, it has helped romance a lot. And it's just kind of made it more mainstream and people are talking about it with pride and no shame, which is great. But there's always going to be the naysayers. And I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder when writing this book and very passionate in my defense of the genre, which, is beloved to me. Like I absolutely love everything about the genre. Work to be done, but lots of work has been done, I would say.
talk a little bit about each of your writing processes because that varies from author to author. Let's start with you, Katie, because I also am interested, if I'm correct, you are an editor as part of your day job.
Yes,
Does that make it
yes.
easier when you're writing a book, or is it more challenging because you want to tell your editor, no, I know what it means to edit and I'm doing this?
Oh no, those are so different sides of my brain. I feel like when I'm editing, I'm very confident and I see the book as it is, and I'm like, oh, I know it needs to be fixed. And then when I'm writing it, I'm like, this was all so bad. I'm so sorry that I turned this into you. Like, please make it better. I have the worst writing process, I feel like, in the entire world. Like, I have not met somebody that's had a worse one than me. I write like a first draft that's usually like 50,000 words, which is not a book and not long enough at all, and it's really horrible. And I'm just like, whatever, gotta chug through it. And I just get the bones there and I print it out and I write in all the margins and I get the meat there and I figure out my characters and I figure out my plot holes and figure out what's going on there. And then I hand it over to the mercy of my agent and my editor and I beg them to give me notes and make it better. It's really just like, I think it's just trial and error for me. It's just kind of writing until the right words come, which probably isn't the best method. And I haven't met somebody else who kind of does it that same way. But yeah, that's basically what I do. It's very separate from my editorial eye, I would say.
Tara, what about you?
Oof, writing is just the hardest thing in the world, and I don't know there's a right way or an easy way or even a more efficient way to do it. I'm a plotter in all aspects of my life. I'm a pantser when I am writing, which is just a terrible feeling. I'm also a perfectionist, and I hate letting.
You may have lost your audio, Tara.
So it's
Up there you go.
for me to share anything that has not been plotted. Can you guys hear me? Thumbs up.
Yeah, you're coming through now.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm it's just a terrible process. I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah, I just write and I try very hard not to edit as I go, but it's a losing battle most days. And I also find that the more books I write, I think the better of a writer I become, but that also means the harsher of a critic I become with my first draft. So each subsequent first draft becomes slower.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Now that you both have books published to your credit, what have you discovered about the business side of writing that surprised you the most? We'll start with you, Katie.
It's it's very networky in a way I hadn't really realized. I also do Bookstagram, and so like I experience, kind of like interacting with authors, but it's very much like in a good way, not in like a bad way, but it's very much
Mm.
like people are so eager to reach out. Other authors are so eager to, follow and connect and talk and all this stuff. And I really wasn't expecting that. I kind of was thought my book would fall into the void and I would never hear from people, but I've made a lot of friends from it, surprisingly so. And I wasn't expecting that at all. And I think also with the business side of it, I didn't know I would have so much control. I don't have like full control, but I didn't know that I would get so much of a say into it. And, I was doing the writing process as I just got my job. So I was learning about both at the very same time. And I didn't know I would be able to, have a say in what my title was if we changed it or, the cover. And if I didn't like it, I didn't know I could really say. And it's been really lovely. I was expecting it to be a lot worse than it actually is, but it's been really lovely.
Tara, what about you?
Yeah, a lot of the same. I think there's a lot of discourse on book talk on bookstagram, and I tend to be a more pessimistic conservative individual in terms of outlook. So I came into this whole process feeling like, it's okay if your book flops, it's okay if someone is mean to you and tags you in their review. And I've actually haven't had very many negative experiences at all. People online are extremely effusive. They reach out with praise. The other writers I've encountered are just so talented and welcoming and warm. And I think the other thing that's been really nice about this wild ride is it just of gives me an excuse to reconnect with people from my past, people I've taken English classes with in middle school, high school, college, people I haven't talked to in decades, um, friends who haven't read a book in decades, and they're like, "Oh, I bought your book and I'm digging in tonight." So that's just been, as an adult, in my mid to late 30s, there's not often opportunities for that to happen organically. You kind of have to force reaching out to your, high school or college network. And this has been a really great opportunity for me to remember those connections and
Um, if I'm correct, Tara, you have an academic business background, and you said you work in brand management.
I work
So,
at yeah, I work in tech as a product manager actually.
uh,
So
does that
yes.
help you? I'm thinking there's such a push, especially recently, for authors to think of themselves in terms of a brand or their books in a certain way. Does it help having that business background to think this is how I can market my, we'll call your book a product, so to speak?
So I don't actually have a strong marketing sales background. Product is more about like, if you pick up your phone and you open an app, what are sort of the bells and whistles and like the
Uh,
tactical targets? I will say that having a business background really drives home how hard it is to be a creative in this world, which is just heartbreaking because the creatives are the ones that make the 9 to 5 worthwhile. Like how many people sort of go home and watch Netflix or read a book to unwind or play video games. Um, so so from a pure financial modeling perspective, and I'm sorry to bring such a dry saltine cracker term into this podcast, it's a terrible investment. Because you spend hours and years writing books that you're not sure are going to sell, if they're going to sell well, and you turn down dinner invitations and hangouts with friends because you got to squeeze in another 500, 1,000 words. It's not a good investment, but we do it because it's, I mean, I can speak for myself at least. I think it's quite essential to the human experience, and therefore it makes it worth it.
That's a wonderful response. Um, Katie, you mentioned you'd worked at the Strand as part of your
Mhm.
background. Does having that knowledge of how bookstores work now help you get, not in my book, into bookstores? Do you go around to bookstores and put it face out and make sure it's up on front tables and things?
I totally should. I'm gonna do that now. It didn't necessarily, I don't know actually. I wrote a letter to booksellers, and I think that had you told me before, like years ago when I wasn't a bookseller, that it would, that I would do that, I would be like, sure, like where will this go? But it was kind of like, no, like I was a bookseller, like I got ARCs and I read the letters to booksellers, and that really did help that perspective of like, oh, like this would be on your book talk table, or this would be in your like recently released fiction and stuff like that. But being a bookseller, just in being surrounded by books, it did help kind of understand like the market and I guess what people are looking for and like what causes a reader to pick up a book or put down a book or the covers that are most interesting, I guess. You really, I mean, in a bookstore and stuff, and you really do get a different perspective of the bookish world, and I'm so lucky that I've gotten like so many. Um, in bookselling, I loved it. Like if I could just do that, for forever I would. I loved it so much, and it really did help with writing this book also to, to talk about books and to talk about why books mean so much to people. Like Tara said, it's very interesting, like, what you see every day in a bookstore, the kind of people and what they pick up, it does relate to the human experience a lot, and I really, really loved it.
Let's talk about both of you as readers because I think that influences your writing journey. Who were some of the books and authors that were important to you that may have kind of helped you along the way? And we'll start with you, Katie.
When I was really little, I loved Andrew Clements. He's, I would say, a middle grade writer. And I remember I would go to my library every single year after, the start of school, and I would see what books he had back out. And I just ate up every single thing that he wrote. And that's, I think, how I fell in love with reading was through his books. But in terms of like how I fell in love with like romance, because I think that was so influential to me. The Hunger Games is like surprisingly my first introduction to romance. I had never read a book where characters could kiss, and there's a lot going on in the Hunger Games. It's a lot more important than the characters kissing, but I was like, I really like that. And I, dove into Rainbow Rowell and Cassie West and all those YA authors who just meant so much to me. And Helen Huang, who wrote The Kiss Quotient, was my first adult romance novel, and my world was changed. There's nothing else for me after that. It was everything to me. And those were the ones that kind of stick with me now.
What about you, Tara?
Gosh, I'm gonna sound like Aiden. I'm sorry. I I grew up on literary fiction. I was told literary fiction is uh, the only genre worth reading. It's what I studied in college, to the extent that I even took literature classes. So, and then sort of during the pandemic, I was like, this is, I mean, I actually enjoy literary fiction, so it's not just all posing. But during the pandemic, I was like, this is too dark. I don't need to question human nature all the time. Um,
Mhm.
and I started reading a lot more romance. So, Gabrielle Zevin, literary fiction, author of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I wanted to I don't want to compare myself to her, obviously, but I wanted to do for romance what and games. I wanted to do for games in the romance genre what she did for games in the literary fiction genre. Um, Another author more squarely in the romance genre I'm a big fan of is TJ Alexander. I think reading their books was the first time that I saw personally. I'm sure there are other authors that do this, but for me, the first time I saw characters that are queer and maybe aren't queer in sort of like very hetero cis presenting ways represented in the genre. And that was just such a breath of fresh air that I didn't even realize I needed. So those are the two authors that come to mind.
For my next question, you can be as expansive or as reticent as you like, because I know authors are very protective about what they're working on, but would you like to share what's coming next from you, Katie?
Yes, I can share. I can share what's online already. I am publishing another book in spring 2026. It's called The Last Page. It's about a girl who works at a used bookstore and is primed to take it over when the owner unexpectedly dies before he can change the will. And so now it's left to his estranged grandson, and they don't get along and they don't necessarily agree on the way the store has to be run, but together they have to work together to save it. So that's what sticks for me. I'm in the middle of writing and I'm super excited about it.
Sounds wonderful. What about you, Tara?
Yes, I am in the process of messy drafting a second chance romance set at a college reunion, a 15-year college reunion, so featuring slightly older protagonists. Something terrible happened. There was an accident when on the eve of their college graduation 15 years ago, and one of the members of the couple, I guess, never realized how serious the accident was and the rippling effects it had on their her ex partner's health, and that all comes back to light when they reconnect at their 15 year.
How can readers discover more about you and your books? What social media platforms are you on? We'll start with you, Tara.
Social media. I am on Blue Sky. You can find me at taratai.com. It's just my name.com on Blue Sky is my handle. And then I'm also on Instagram, probably more than I'd like, at the handle Tarza Parza Gaga Pan. I clearly did not anticipate writing a book when I created the handle, but it is PARZAPARZAGAGAPAN. So good luck.
Katie?
I'm on Twitter and TikTok and Instagram at Read and Romance, and you can find me there.
That's great. Um, our time has just flown by. We've been very fortunate at the Poison Pen Bookstore to have with us two wonderful, amazing debut authors, Katie Holt and Tara Tai, whose new books are out now and available for purchase. I'd like to thank both of them for taking time to share with us today. And for those tuning in virtually, thank you for joining us for another author chat with the Poison Pen Bookstore.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. This was so
Thank
fun.
you. You were both wonderful. I really enjoyed both your books. I can't